Now, three-row SUVs in Malaysia are not really all that common. We've got the Volkswagen Tiguan Allspace, the Hyundai Santa Fe, the Peugeot 5008, and at some point we should be seeing the Kia Sorento, but for the most part, like I said, they're really not all that common. So Mazda's decision to bring in the CX-8, which is considered to be a larger version of the CX-5, a three-row version of the CX-5, is a little bit curious. However, they said that demand for this car was very strong upon introduction, and since then it's gone on to find quite a few homes. Based on the same platform as the larger CX-9, the Mazda CX-8 promises a degree of refinement and poise that apparently outdoes the CX-5 in many areas. And today we're going to find out. My name is Aiman I. Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring, and this is our review of the 2022 Mazda CX-8 2.5 High. Now, like I said, the CX-8 is supposed to resemble a larger CX-5, and so from the front, there's very little to tell them apart. You still get the same full LED headlights with, unfortunately, bulb indicators, but they are bi-beam LEDs with automatic high beam. You get LED fog lights down there. You get this massive chrome strip that goes from one side to the other, which unfortunately still remains just slightly split in the middle, which is a little bit of a shame. You do get this enormous grille. However, the difference between the CX-8 and the CX-5 is that the CX-8 gets these chrome slats that go across, whereas the CX-5 gets sort of like this honeycomb mesh thing, which is a pain in the arse to clean, but this looks a little bit more stately. Now, down the side, you get very large dark chrome alloy wheels, which really set the side of this car off. There are some chrome trims sort of around the windows and on the bottom of the doors. You don't get roof rails for this car, however, but the biggest difference, of course, is from the C-pillar onwards. Because the wheelbase of this car has been stretched, and now, of course, there is a third row to accommodate, the roof line has been pulled toward the rear, and there is a lot more metal work back there in order to, again, accommodate the rear seats and, of course, the larger rear windows. Now, for the most part, this car does look quite brawny, and that does continue at the rear. Because I know some of you are slight anoraks about this, I should clarify that this car rides on 19-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Toyo tires, and we'll talk a little bit about their quietness and performance a little bit later, but I want to talk about the rear. Now, the CX-8 again resembles the CX-5 quite a bit, so you have these relatively small tail lights, but the CX-8 does get this wide chrome strip that goes all the way across, which I must admit makes this car look really good. The CX-5 to me looked a little bit unfinished. In this, it looks polished and put together, which I certainly appreciate. Now, because this is a larger car, you would expect a larger cargo space, and you would be kind of right and kind of wrong. So you do get a powered tailgate, naturally, but in terms of space back here with the third row up, there isn't really that much room. As you can see, we've got a soft bag in here, and you could probably put two of these or maybe some of those smaller sort of cabin-sized bags, a couple of those back here, but that's about it. In terms of the space sort of back here, you will definitely need to fold these seats down if you want to really use it. You do get a couple of hooks here at least for you to kind of put things there, that sort of hook is for. But you can fold these seats very easily. You just sort of pull this handle here, the headrest pops down, and then you can just push it straight down, revealing a lot more space back here. And of course, putting it up is also just as easy. You take that same handle and pull it up, and there you go. Your third row is deployed. Now, is there a kick function to this? No. So there is still a button back here in order to close it, and this car does come with a walk-away lock. So once the car has detected that you've left the vehicle, once you walk away from it, it will lock itself, which I find to be a very nifty feature. You can also set the volume for the beep to let you know that the car is locked between low and high. I prefer it in high because I'm a paranoid Nelly, and then you'll be able to know that your car is safe and secure. Now, the CX-8, like I said, is a very polished machine, and that polish continues inside. Now, inside the Mazda CX-8, it's a mix of the familiar and the new. So the overall architecture in here again looks a lot like what you'd expect from a Mazda. Everything is laid out in this very horizontal kind of way. Everything sort of splits up in order to sort of make everything look very posh. There is this wood type trim. I don't think it's actual wood, but it does a very good job of simulating it, and you get a lot of silver bright work around the place to sort of uplift the interior ambiance. Now, because this car has a very dark cabin, the seats are actually a very dark burgundy, while the top of the door cards and the dash are all done up in black. The use of silver really does a lot to make the car feel a little bit more premium, because otherwise, without all this bright work, it would be kind of dingy in here. There is some piano black plastic around the place, like in the center console, but because you're not going to be using this very often, it should be okay. There are already some micro scratches on this. This car is relatively new, so that should tell you about whether or not this will be able to stand the test of time. But in terms of the overall architecture, it does look very good. You have the MZD Connect controller down here with a little volume knob here. You get a separate set of climate controls here as well, with all the buttons all feeling very, very nice to hold and very, very nice to touch. And the same goes to the steering wheel. All the buttons here are all laid out in a very sensible manner, and everything feels very nice to hold and touch and interact with, which is exactly what you'd want out of a car at this price point, nearing 200,000 ringgit. Now, of course, with the CX-8, you get a lot of the familiar, so you get the same sort of analog dials that you would have gotten from the CX-5, but you now get a heads-up display, full color at that, displayed on the windscreen to give you all of the pertinent information that you want. Unfortunately, this car does not come with adaptive cruise control, which is a shame. It does come with almost everything else, but we'll talk about that in the driving portion. Now, the CX-8 selling point naturally is the back, so we're going to go and move there and talk a little bit more. Now, you join me in the back of the CX-8, where it's a very nice place to be. This high model comes as a 6-seater, so in the place of a middle seat, you get this fixed center console with a couple of cup holders and a very large central bin with a couple of USB ports, which is very, very nice. Now, in addition to that, you also get triple zone climate control in this car with its own controls back here, with a couple of air vents set on the rear of the front center console, which allows rear passengers to get a little bit more comfortable. Now, as you can see, in terms of legroom, it is absolutely fantastic. There's still enough room back there for children, and this is the furthest back that it can be set, although of course you want to be a bit more generous. You can slide these quite a ways forward, in fact, to the point where if you didn't have legs, you could make that work, or you could set it to about here. You can tuck your feet in underneath and still have a decent amount of leg and headroom. But if there's nobody back there, you can enjoy the absolutely cavernous amounts of space in here. There is a bit of a center tunnel, so middle seat passenger wouldn't have been comfortable anyway, but because of the space back here, you can really enjoy it. You've got sun blinds here, you've got a coat hook, naturally. Like I said, the cup holders earlier. These rear seats are also heated. For a car that's locally assembled, I think they should have swapped this out for ventilation. But more importantly, these ISOFIX mounted seats can also recline. So you can just sit back here and have a snooze while the driver makes haste to where it is that you need to go. As I said earlier, this is a 3-row SUV, which means access to the back does come from these seats here. You can't walk through the middle, which means you do have to fold this out of the way, and once you do get back there, things are not really that great. There are cup holders on either side, there is a 12-volt socket, but there are no air conditioning vents back there, which means you will be reliant on the blowers from the second row in order to get cold air all the way back there. Additionally, the rear quarter lights are not very large, which means children are going to have a tough time trying to see out, and naturally, because the seats are set quite close to the ground, you really don't want to put adults there for any more than about half an hour. That said though, it's not all bad news. The seats in this car are set up in sort of concert seating, so every seat base is higher the further back you progress, so you always enjoy a very clear view out of the vehicle. And like I said earlier, this car is quite refined. Mazda's talked quite a bit about the refinement in this car, although we can only really talk about that when we're on the move, right? So let's get back to the driver's seat and see what's what. All right, now driving the Mazda CX-8. Now, even though it looks like a CX-5, as I've said earlier, this car is actually based on the same platform as the Mazda CX-9, and so this car does aim to provide a much more premium feel. Now, I certainly hope that the camera angle that we're using here does show the sheer size of this thing, because this car is really quite large. And from behind the wheel, you can very easily forget just how big this car is. Now, being a Mazda, it is very agile to drive, and the steering wheel feels very, very intuitive and very, very connected. So it does communicate a lot back to you as the driver. On top of that, the suspension is, as per usual with Mazdas, incredibly well judged. It's not too soft, it's not too pliant, so much so that it would create or indulge in body roll. This car remains very, very controlled, especially through high-speed corners, but it's not so stiff that the primary ride suffers as a result. Now, in addition to all of that, of course, is the NVH. Now, the Mazda CX-5 is already a pretty quiet car, much better than vehicles like the Honda CR-V, for example, but the CX-8 sort of dials it up a little bit. Burma has actually spoke quite a bit about how special attention was paid to the rear three quarters to insulate as much of the paneling as possible in order to reduce the amount of noise that comes into the cabin. And it must be said that it does really pay dividend. For starters, even north of the national speed limit, there is very little in terms of road noise entering the cabin. Sorry, wind noise entering the cabin. Road noise is present, but it's not so overbearing that it would tire either the driver or indeed the passengers for that matter. This car, like I said, does remain very composed and very well insulated even at speed. Now, when you are at speed, of course, that's when you'd be reliant on some of the safety systems, or you'd be hoping there'd be some safety systems. And so to that end, this car does come with a heads-up display, which is great because you can see your speed, you can see your cruise control settings, and you can see the lane keep assist, for example, displayed up on the heads-up display along with the prevailing speed limit. The trouble is that even though it's got lane keep assist and blind spot monitoring and smart city brake support, which is basically AEB, unfortunately this car does not come with adaptive cruise control. Now, I touched on this before with the Mazda 6 review, where I said that this car presents itself in a very premium manner, and it does so very convincingly, but it's a shame that it stops short of offering level 2 semi-autonomy. Now, I've no doubt that had this car been made available with adaptive cruise control, especially one that would be able to tackle sort of traffic jams, that sort of thing, this would be a much easier car to recommend. Not that I wouldn't, because this is a very well-rounded package, especially with this 2.5-litre petrol engine. Now, when we were given the keys to this car, I was a little bit skeptical because the CX-8 is also available with a 2.2-litre turbo diesel as well as all-wheel drive, and personally that is the powertrain option that I'd pick. The 2.2-litre diesels available from Mazda are very smooth operators and they are very frugal on fuel while still offering really good performance. But that said, this 2.5-litre has surprised me. Again, this is the same mill that I sampled in the Mazda 6, and once again, here it shows itself to be a very smooth operator. It revs very freely. It's got a nice noise to it as well when you do put your foot down, and the 6-speed automatic gearbox does a very good job of responding very quickly. Even though this car doesn't come with paddle shifters, at no point did I feel the need to use it. I actually took this car out on a quick drive up to Temerloh for lunch, and I came back, and despite the relatively coarse surfaces on the Kara Highway and of course the East Coast Expressway, this car remained very quiet and very composed throughout, and through the corners it was able to manage the speed and manage the body roll very convincingly. Now, in terms of drawbacks, there are not many, if I'm honest. The thing is, the Mazda CX-8 is available either as a 7-seater in only the most basic variant, whereas everything else comes as a 6-seater. This high variant comes with a rear center console, which I talked about in the walk around, and admittedly that does present a little bit of a drawback in the sense that you have to fold the side seats, the captain's chairs, in order to access the third row. Some people would prefer being able to walk through the pass-through in the middle, but personally, given the fact that this car, I mean, in terms of interior volume, it's not that tall, it wouldn't be a good idea to have people sort of walking through that space anyway. So I do think that this is a much better compromise in that regard. Additionally, there is also the fact that in terms of luggage space, with all 3 rows up, it's not the most spacious area in the world. If you do have this car loaded up with 6 people, you would probably just want to have them all pack soft bags and maybe not travel for more than maybe 3 days or 4 days at a time, because if you go any longer than that, there would be a concern there might not be enough space to pack all that luggage. Now, in that trip to Temerloh that I mentioned earlier, I did manage to have 3 friends with me in the car, and so we did manage to test out the third row, and what I said earlier was correct. You do not want to have adults back there for any more than about 30 to 40 minutes at a time, because it can be quite uncomfortable. Once they move from the third row back into the second row, of course, all their complaints were put aside. This car is very comfortable. And if, for example, you only really use 4 seats and you want the extra 2 as a bonus for versatility, or you just want a CX-8 because it has more luggage space than a CX-5, then this would be certainly a great idea. Now, I do need to touch on price. The Mazda CX-8 2.5 high Plus, I think, or whatever this variant is. It's the highest 2.5 litre front-wheel drive variant available, is just under 200,000 ringgit, 198,000 ringgit, 193,000 ringgit before taxes and insurance. Now, that might seem like a lot of money, and it's certainly not an inconsiderable amount, but that said, you are getting a lot of car for the money. Short of a Rolls-Royce Phantom, nothing can drown out noises like that. Now, like I said, you are getting a lot of car for the money. For starters, this car is absolutely huge, which means even if you are carrying 6 passengers, all of them will be relatively comfortable with decent amount of legroom and headroom, even in the third row. You have an absolutely enormous cargo space, which doesn't come with a tonneau cover for whatever reason. And it does look very good. Compared to the Mazda CX-5, which is a car that I don't particularly like the rear of. The rear end of this car looks a lot more resolved. And there's something about it which I think just really sets it off. And I'm very glad that I got this car in black, which is a metallic black rather than the signature soul red metallic, because there is something about this car in black with the dark chrome alloy wheels and all of the bright work around the bodywork. This makes this car look really premium. On top of that, you do get adaptive LED headlights, not just active high beam, but adaptive LED, which means that when you're driving at night, you can drive with confidence because this car will try and use the high beam as much as possible without dazzling other road users, which is a great addition for a car like this, which will most likely be spending most of its life as a touring vehicle where you pack the whole family and you go off on a long journey somewhere. Now, if you're looking at a Mazda CX-8, again, I do advise considering the 2.2 litre all-wheel drive model because the diesel will return better fuel economies, particularly when you're driving at higher speed on the motorway, and the security of all-wheel drive will come in handy when the heavens open up and proceed to completely flood our roads. But if you drive primarily in town and you still want a large SUV like this, compared to vehicles like the Volkswagen Tiguan Allspace, this car definitely presents a bit more refinement and a bit more poise compared to the Tiguan. It's a pretty good car, the VW Tiguan, no doubt. If you've seen our review of that, you'll know the praises that we've lopped on it, but somehow or another, this car feels just a little bit more polished. You add to that the Mazda suite of safety systems, which again, lacking adaptive cruise control, it just makes it a much more cohesive package, and it's certainly something that I would want to ferry my family in if I had one. Would I recommend this? Absolutely. The 2.5 litre especially is very, very good in town. The 2.2 litre turbo diesel is much better if you drive longer distances over higher speed more often. And ultimately, buying a Mazda means that you are buying into the reliability and assuredness of Burma's after-sales service. Now, they've already done an incredible job with Mazda after taking over the distributorship rights from Cycle & Carriage, what feels like 15 billion years ago. And since then, they have continued to impress and wow customers with their commitment to excellent after-sales service. And that is something that will no doubt continue with this latest generation of Mazdas and indeed the brands that they've picked up since. So would I recommend this? Absolutely. It's a fantastic car. It's absolutely impressed me beyond my expectations. And I'm sure that if you were to take one out for a test drive, it will blow your mind too. A little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. This is ultimately a family SUV anyway. In any case, that's been our review of the new Mazda CX-8 2.5 high petrol front-wheel drive 6-seater. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all of our subscribers, new and old, for continuing to support the channel. We hope that you'll be able to share our content with like-minded friends and family who will be able to enjoy the efforts that we put in order to bring this content to you. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe. Jangan bodoh.